people will, I'm sure, say, "Oh, we'll always sin." What if there's a time where we don't? It could take a lot to get there, possibly genetic engineering to root out things, psychopathic tendencies, and it could be both a combination of both genetic engineering as well as just a society structured well. When you think about how a dog is a domesticated wolf, and how was that accomplished? Breeding over thousands of years. And, that was actually the big one, breeding. Only breeding certain temperaments, but also conditioning. Meaning you could have a domesticated dog who's still out of control if you don't train him right. So it was both. The dog, when they come into the world, still has to be trained, but also breeding for the baseline. And so, boom, we have taken the wild of a wolf and turned it into a dog that can sleep next to your kids. I want you to think about that, how epic that is, and how if we could do that with humans, I know I sound like some weird alien or angelic being saying, if we could just do this with humans, imagine the results, is all I'm trying to say. Because humans and their ability to invent and their intellectual capacity is so much greater. Imagine if we actually improved ourselves in the same way that we have improved the wolf to the dog. Okay? It'd be amazing. We may actually live in a time where there is no more sin. People have no more thoughts or desires to commit murder. No more, not driven by lust. No more desire for greed. The other issue is, if you live in a society that's structured differently and there's no need for greed, it's like this. It's like we don't live in a post-nuclear apocalyptic environment. We don't know the kind of scarcity that a caveman or a post-nuclear war person would know, where you would think about cannibalism and eating your neighbor. We don't have the temptation to cannibalism, okay? Because we live in an environment that it's not necessary to eat your neighbor. And therefore, the temptation for cannibalism is gone. So when it comes to cannibalism, 99.9% of us are sinless. You hear what I just said? If you eliminate the environment, the conditions that prompts people to be tempted towards sin, there's no more need for it. The lion can lay next to the lamb if you have engineered them this way to do this. I believe this is possible too, by the way. I think it's unlikely, but it is possible. And I'm being hopeful here. I just know that we're not headed in that direction. We're heading in the wrong direction. We're going away from the blueprints. There's one thing. I guess it would have to all be done in baby steps, probably over centuries. Each, like, one whole century could be devoted to eliminating just one thing. And I think the one thing that was needed to be eliminated the most is pride. Ego, as they call it nowadays. If you could eliminate ego and pride, there are so many things. That is the root of so many issues. Like a person's vanity to want to have a Lamborghini. This all comes from pride. They think that they're better than other people, so therefore they should have a better car than everyone or a better house. And that's why they have to have better things, because they think they're better. If you didn't think that you were better than other people, or at the very least didn't feel the need to try to look better than other people, you wouldn't have the need for useless things like that. It wouldn't be driven by envy. Also, if it wasn't even possible through the system you lived in, for example, I'm just going to give an example. If people were only allowed to own up to $1 million worth of assets, then collecting super yachts would be impossible. First of all, it would be against the law. Second of all, if people just didn't have ego, they would feel no desire to it. You see how I'm attacking this from two fronts, external and internal. The internal one is hard. That's a personal choice. That's up to each person. Let me explain to you the benefit of having no ego. You don't feel envy. You're not tempted into vanity. Honestly, ego is the root of almost every sin. Even revenge. Yeah, even revenge. I know you have revenge. It's there. It's in there. It's in there. Not as much as others, though, especially like envy and that kind of stuff. So it's almost like when I go inside, I need to one of these days sit down and make like a map of what people need to do over the decades and over the centuries, and how, and in an operation of order too. It's like the first priority here is eliminate ego, convince people that having an ego, thinking so highly of yourself, is self-destructive to your own. It is self-destructive to your life and to your happiness. And this is, that's what I was saying. I was trying to convince people that it is still worthwhile to remove. You will feel better. You won't feel pressured to have to compete with people in the world. It's the beginning of personal freedom to let go of your ego. The whole New Age movement, they've been talking about this stuff, about ego and stuff. And just listen, okay? Just listen. But I also think that for those who do not want to partake in trying to reduce or remove their ego, there also need to be laws to reduce the harm from ego-driven behavior. Greed is probably the most obvious and common and rampant one. Greed. Trying to say you have more than other people. If you're only allowed to have more than only $1 million of assets and the rest is redistributed, well, I mean, you still want a nice house. Prices of everything obviously are going to adapt and adjust. I know there's homes out there that are that were $500,000 that are worth like $5 million. It's just a number. I'm just throwing it. It's a principle, basically, that you're only allowed to own so much. And if there was a minimum and maximum income cap, that's right, a maximum income cap of $100,000, a minimum cap of $10,000. So at least the disparity of rich to poor is 10 to 1, not infinite to 1. Yeah, income caps. That way all these pro ball players and OnlyFans and all these other people who contribute nothing to society, they only get to keep $100,000 of it. That's it. Prices will adjust. Houses won't be worth millions. They'll come down. When the maximum income is $100,000 and the minimum is $10,000, prices will come down. And get this, people at that $10,000 minimum, they'll be able to afford a house while they contribute to society. It's amazing, isn't it? Amazing. This is a simple little adjustment that can be made in our current world that would make a big impact. An income cap. A minimum and maximum limit. Yep. And also a maximum asset amount that you can have. People in political office need to actually only be allowed to have the median average amount of resources, so that the person in office is a reflection of your average person in the country that they represent. Everyone in American politics, they're at least millionaires. That's a problem. That's a huge conflict of interest. There's nobody of the working class, the lower class. Okay, for those of you who don't know, I'm going to update you. If you have $1 billion or more, you're in the upper class. If you have $1 million or more, you're in the middle class. Million for middle. And if you're a thousandaire, okay, not a millionaire, a thousandaire, you're poor. You're in the lower class. I hate to tell you this. There are people out there, they think because they've got, like, say, $50,000 or $60,000, they're like, I'm rich, you're poor. That's nothing. There are people out there with billions of dollars. Those are the upper class. And if you're in the trillionaire class, you're the Rothschilds, you run the world. So there's that whole other super class. But In terms of just the three main classes, upper, middle, lower, if you're not a millionaire, you are not in the middle class. You are in the lower class. I tell you this, most people are in the lower class. So, just so you know, when I'm talking about upper, middle, and lower, what numbers I'm talking about here. No one person should have so much power with their resources that they could start a war, make entire groups of people homeless, or starve entire areas of people, like by buying the farms and then burning the farms. You know, the wealthy could do that if they wanted. They could buy food sources and then destroy them if they wanted to. That's too much power. It's reckless. It's irresponsible that a society would allow one person or a small group of people that much power, especially when they're all buddies with each other, because then they could coordinate their resources. The working class, the majority of people, don't have a chance. They don't have a chance. They can't lobby their powers like the wealthy can. So, maximum assets limit, life imprisonment for those who violate it at labor camps. They can work. They try to exploit the population. They can work off their debts to the society. So it'll scare the crap out of people to come close to that $1 million limit. They'll probably want to leave a buffer of like $100,000, so they'll only have like $900,000 worth of stuff, like a $500,000 house, a $50,000 boat, a $50,000 car, and they'll be like, "That's all I need." Yeah, and still live very nice. That's right. I have a suspicion with those kind of income caps and with these kind of adjustments, like the price of, say, like a $10 million house would probably come down to about $1 million. No one, that's the thing, no one could sell a house for $1 million by that point, because you go a penny over, you're going to prison. You know, so you'll see house prices no higher than, say, $900,000, and that would be rare because people are still going to need that other $100,000 for other stuff like a vehicle and everything else. So you're going to see prices of everything come down. With those kind of rules implemented, prices of everything will come down to about $900,000 or less. Sure, incomes are capped between $10,000 and $100,000, but prices will also come down. And that also means now, if you only need one house, person only needs one house to live, so you just live in one house. And if you want to go live somewhere else, before you go buy that house, you'll have to sell yours, and there'll have to be a swap, so they happen at the same time, something to that effect. So as long as you're not stuck by the end of the year owning both, and then go to prison. I'm serious. People need to be afraid of having too much, more than they need. Afraid of being greedy. Oh, you see what I've just done? Afraid of real-world consequences for doing behavior that exploits and enslaves a population. And everybody is held accountable to it. It'll allow people to focus on things of more importance in life. Most people, their greed has robbed them of their lives. They spend most of their life, like they already had enough after a certain point in their life to just not have to worry about anything anymore. But they continue to play a game. They're addicted. It's unfortunate. They're addicted. It's the brain chemistry that has caused them to then want to continue to consume. And in their hunger for more that they don't need, that greed, they deprive. They deprive so much from the country, everyone else that is not wealthy. And here's another thing too, and they're bullies. They're bullies, okay? It's if you were born smarter than most people, it's pathetic to use that to beat everyone else up, to enslave them, etc. It's pathetic. Because you're going to be held in judgment. There is an intelligence and a consciousness. infinitely greater than you who sees what you do. You don't think that he can't see how you've treated your neighbors, how you've treated other people, how you've played games. He can't see how you've ignored the needs of others so you could buy more things you don't need. You don't think he can't see that waste? How you participated in an evil society? Of course he can see that. John the Baptist taught that the man who has 2 shirts should give one of his shirts to the man who has none. Jesus taught to take as much as he needs to live and give the rest away. He told the wealthy, he ordered the wealthy to give their wealth away to the poor and then come and follow him. That was what they taught, and that's what I follow. I follow Jesus specifically, but the reason I mentioned John the Baptist is because Jesus held John the Baptist in high regard. Jesus said, of those born amongst women, John the Baptist is the greatest. That's a pretty big thing if Jesus is saying you are like the coolest person on the planet. So I regard what John the Baptist says. I'm not saying he's the Messiah or the teacher, and he's not gospel, but if he said something, I listen to it. Because Jesus held him in high regard. And he said the man who has 2 shirts should give one of his shirts to the man who has none. John the Baptist taught sharing. I know, it hurts the wicked heart so bad. It burns, doesn't it? Sharing. I know, it hurts. It hurts. You'll be okay. You'll be okay. Jesus taught actually something more severe than that. John the Baptist was basically teaching socialism, which is 50% tax, basically. Jesus taught communism. That's why the early church they were called communes. They were called communes. That's right. And it describes, I believe in the book of Acts, that the early church divided their resources accordingly, making sure everyone's needs were met, and they prospered. And they prospered. I'm not talking about crony communism that we've seen in the last 100 years, where you still have the wealthy. That wasn't real communism, by the way. What that was revolutions were led against monarchies, like in Russia, for example, and the monarchs were just replaced by the leaders of the revolutions. The leaders of the revolutions then still kept lots of properties and controlled lots of property. They weren't communists. They were just fascists, and they called themselves communists, but they just made everybody equally poor. They just distributed resources of the poor amongst the poor while they still owned and controlled most things. It was not communism. Okay. The only time we ever saw real communism was the early church. That was it. And it worked, though. I just need to say that. I've suspected that Western countries like to keep countries like North Korea around to scare people out of communism, to scare people out of what Jesus taught us and how to live. See, if you go communism, you'll be like North Korea. And another thing is, if you take a poor country, it doesn't matter what form of economic model or government they have, they're still going to be poor. Whether they're more or less organized, that's kind of another issue. They're still going to be poor overall. If they have nothing to contribute to the global market, they're still going to be poor compared to other countries. So they could be any economic model. They could be capitalist. They could be anything. They would still be poor. So I just need to also make that point too. People who want to hate against what Jesus taught, which is communism, and love to think that Jesus was capitalist. They love it. They love capitalist Jesus. Capitalism is moneyism. It's materialism. It's greed driven. Adam Smith talked about that, how greed will be people's motivation, as he talked about the necessity of basically capitalism. Yeah, in a greed-driven, evil society, yes, greed is the number one reason for doing anything in an evil and wicked society. Jesus taught against that, though. Jesus taught about sharing. I know. It sounds so... I can't even say the words on YouTube. It's the way, though. Okay, and I got news for you guys here's the problem. There's so many people out there, they think that they are so smart that they think they're never going to get caught for murder. They think they're going to find every loophole. They think they're going to be Bill Gates. I knew guys when I was in my 20s. I knew one guy when I was in my 20s. He thought he was going to be the next Bill Gates. I thought he was so funny. He was for real though. He was really at a point he was for real. Now, I'm sure by now he'll just play it off and say, "Oh, I was just joking, you know me." No, he was for real. Okay? And his billion dollar idea, you know what it was? To create a computer repair company. Yeah. Something that already existed. This was back in the mid 2000s, okay? Computer repair companies were everywhere. Best Buy had it. I mean, everybody had it pretty much. His business model to be the next Bill Gates. See, Bill Gates created something that didn't exist until then. That there was a huge desire for it in the market, which was an operating system like Windows to be able to use computers. That's why Bill Gates made a bunch of money. But this guy's business model was computer repair. Wow. This guy really aspired to be like Bill Gates, really wanted to be like Bill Gates, and it was sad. It was really sad. And he would have defended capitalism to the death, even though he is the slave to capitalism. And that's the funny thing I find, is that most people who would benefit from communism, meaning people who are not billionaires, they are against capitalism. They've been trained to run away from the cure in many ways, not just economic model and disobeying Jesus, but they've just been trained to just hate the solution and hate the cure. They're afraid of it. Another thing that Jesus taught was that interest is a sin. He talks about when you're lending, don't ask for anything in return. Even to enemies, he said, if you're lending, don't ask for anything in return. He's referring to interest, most likely. Interest is a sin. Okay, we have the technology now, especially, to have government loans at zero interest. If you buy a house in America through the government with no interest, I mean, if you just bail on the house to go somewhere else, they can find you. If you just can't make the payments anymore, this can be worked with, etc. Like I said, I imagine a world without homelessness. A world without homelessness. Can you imagine that? No more fear of having to survive anymore. No more interest. Who benefits from interest, by the way? The average person or the wealthy? Yeah, that's right. You know who benefits. It's the wealthy. And yet the average person, why do they tolerate interest? They say, well, we all hate it. And here's another funny thing, too, I always thought was funny. The national debt, right? The income tax only goes towards to pay the interest. We don't pay towards the principal. And now, if I'm not mistaken, the debt is so high now, there is not enough money in the world to actually repay the debt now. And I think, then why are we still paying a debt that can't be repaid? That is foolish. Needed to declare some kind of jubilee, clear the debt. There is no debt. We need to come up with a balanced budget, etc., so that there's no need to loan, borrow, or anything. No interest, none of that stuff. Get the banks out and uninvolved, like the Federal Reserve, for example. Get it uninvolved with American government. No more loaning from banks, becoming indebted to banks, so that we have to go to their wars if they want us to go to war. You understand the problem here? America is not owned by the American people and has not been for like more than a century. I hate to tell you this. It's owned by the people who own the military, who pay the soldiers, who own the American infrastructure. That's who decides if we go to war or not. You have no say in this. I've always said that when it comes to war, it should be as simple as the people vote on war, and everybody who votes for war is put on the draft list. That's right. You really think we should go to war? Yeah, put your money where your mouth is. You're going to be on the draft list. There's just so many little quick fixes. Like, we don't need... This is not 1800. The people can vote if they want to go to war or not. Or if they want to send $50 or $100 billion to another country that has a corrupt government, and then their leader just buys super yachts with it. We could do that now. We have that ability to do it. We don't need a couple crooked people that are easily bought and manipulated, and that we have to hope we voted for the right person. We don't need them. We can start taking people out of the loop. People can vote for the most major and significant issues directly. I know. Oh, but they can control the vote. They already control the puppet. It's easier to control one man than it is to try to control a vote of, more than 100 million people. So let's not go down that route. I'm choosing the route that it's harder to corrupt rather than easier. Anyway. A lot of simple fixes. I've had years to think about this stuff. I'm still set on the things I just mentioned. I really wish people would think more about this stuff. I hear lots of people on YouTube complaining about problems, but you never hear solutions. And then here's the funny thing, when people actually put solutions out that would work, or at least are better than what we got, you're going to hear lots of resistance and fighting and naysaying, and okay, well, I guess we're just going to continue to sink then, So, man, those early spring leaves, they're so bright green. They're so new. That's one of the reasons why I like spring so much. Uncut grass, brand new. Alright, I'm gonna head back inside. That doggy of mine is waiting for his dinner. Didn't want to take him on a walk today because of my neighbor burning all that stuff, and you can smell smoke. And I didn't want him breathing all that smoke, but it does look like a nice sunset.